I'm honored to be the executive director here at the Saugatuck-Douglas History Center, and I thought I'd share a little bit about us for those of you who may be new to the organization, and if maybe you've been involved for a long time, draw out some of the connections between our mission and the different ways we've been involved in the community as it relates to historic preservation. Our mission is to preserve local history and inspire learning to inform and improve our community. And that's a big reason why we're doing this program this evening. We're a volunteer-driven organization. We have over 700 members that are committed to saving and sharing the stories of the Lakeshore area. I have an established tradition of doing oral history, of managing, caring for some of the most treasured collections and art objects for our community. And you can see some of those around the room for you today. We have over 400 works of original art that were all made here at the Lakeshore, here at the Art Coast of Michigan, and we have an additional display downstairs in the main first floor gallery. So do check that out if you haven't seen Seasons at the Lakeshore exhibit yet. We were founded as the Saugatuck-Douglas Historical Society in 1986, and it was really a core group of volunteers that came together as a grassroots activist preservation group when the Saugatuck Village Hall was under threat of a major expansion, renovation, transformation in the mid-1980s. Ultimately, they were successful. The now City Hall building is well preserved and recently restored and lives on in its form. But out of that activism birthed in March of 1986, the Historical Society. So we have two main campuses, the one we're at today in the Douglas Union School, built in 1866 and restored in 2008, and the Saugatuck Pump House building that you see here, an historic photograph from around 1904 that became a history center, managed and restored property starting in 1992. Other projects that we've done, certainly one of the most popular sites in Douglas, the Douglas Root Beer Barrel, which was first constructed and began operating much as it is today back in 1952, and then from 2011 to 2018 was a History Center Friends of the Root Beer Barrel project to completely rehabilitate that great piece of roadside architecture and put it back into use with the city of Douglas. And we also see Mount Baldhead Saugatuck Gap Filler Radar Annex, which was listed on the National Register dating back from the 1950s and 1960s, listed on the National Register just in the last year, in the last 2 years, and the historic Demarest Fishing Shanty, a project that Friends of the Shanty made possible with the help of Retro Boat Rentals in 2021. And the Francis life-saving boat from the 1850s on display in the boat barn, our Rowing Them Safely Ashore exhibit in the garden there, brought back to life in the early 2000s. So many historic preservation projects, some of which are sites that we still actively use and manage, and others have been shared with the community or managed by partners and collaborators. So a good model in a lot of different ways to do historic preservation, right? To ensure that historic buildings and resources continue to survive and find new uses and find support to maintain them. So I thought I'd start out, I want to make this somewhat interactive at different points in the discussion as we talk about Dutcher Lodge. But I want to talk through a couple of things here. One is, what do we mean by a historic property? What makes something historically special, worthy of preservation? What are some of the ways we designate historic properties? What's the terminology we use for that? And then a bit of the history of Dutcher Lodge, what makes it special, what makes it unique here in Douglas over time, how has it been preserved, over its lifetime. What changes has it gone through, and what challenges has it faced? And what's the future of Dutcher Lodge? And that's really where I think there's some opportunity for you all to share some of your reactions and some of your ideas with that. But starting out here, I had this view to help give you a sense of really the History Center's History Museum, Mount Baldhead, and work here. But I thought, what a great photo to kind of look at and think about what makes a place historic. And so what are some of the historic features that you see in this view here? You can just kind of call out some features that you see. Go ahead, say that again. The building, okay. So the building itself, so that municipal pump house from 1904, okay.
I think the radar dome probably brings back memories of the Cold War and, watching for the Ruski missiles to come. That's what it reminds me of when I grew up in Chicago. We had Nike missile sites right on the lake.
Right. So that radar installation, and you know a lot about it from living here and living through some of that history. So that brings that history personally to mind. And we can certainly see that it retains a lot of its original features and its form, and so dramatic sitting in that setting too, right? Yeah.
And I can remember before they put the dome on, so you had that constant circular of the radar, and it was working. It was functioning.
Kept the Russians.
It kept us all safe, right? Absolutely, yeah. Strong deterrence. Absolutely, we can think about, I didn't bring in all those historic photos. You can see lots of them on our website. But changes, even within this is on the National Register, but it went through some changes. It looked different, was modified from the late 1950s into the 1960s, into the form that it retains today. What else? What are some other features that you see that help make this a historic place?
Its function and purpose.
Okay. You want to say a little more about that?
Its function and its purpose.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So the building still has a purpose. Where there was once generator equipment and pumps, there's now museum exhibits in our gift shop, right? But the building still has a function to it that's compatible with with its original form, right?
And we maintained the architectural integrity of the building.
We did, yeah. So these are really some key terms, and you're a smart audience, as I expected. So we can think about, what makes a place historic. One is that it has significance, and Elliot talked about recognize the Cold War military infrastructure significance of this site here, why it was built on top of this dune looking out towards the north across the Great Lakes region, watching for Russian Soviet bombers to come through. And we know about the history of this building, why it was built here right literally on the water to be able to pump water across the river and along the river for the first municipal water service in the early 1900s in Saugatuck. Some other features weren't pointed out, right? The stairs, those 300 plus stairs. They've changed over time, right? This is I think the fifth, when we did the Lure of Mount Baldhead exhibit, I think this might be the fifth set of stairs that's been built in more or less the same place, which raises some questions about integrity. Are these the same stairs? Are these historically significant if they've been rebuilt 5 times and there's no original fabric that survives of them, right? We would consider the place historic because that experience and that setting and that location is so much the same. And its function of bringing people to the top of Mount Baldhead for all kinds of reasons that you can learn more about at the Lure of Mount Baldhead exhibit tomorrow night. These are all historical features. The landscape itself, right, makes it historically significant too. So the dune itself, though constantly shifting, right, has been there for thousands and thousands of years and been an attraction and a landmark of spiritual significance, right, of personal significance, of practical significance, and challenge all of that time.
After you've said all of that, one of my thoughts was the people that were involved with the building are probably the most important thing that keeps something still around. Stories that are told about what went on here. So Dutcher Lodge, the schoolhouse, all of that's about people.
Yeah. That's a really great point. Thinking back to my time in graduate school, and my advisor, he often talked about the difference between, studied a lot of architectural history and material culture type stuff, and thought about, this distinction between space and place, right? In space we think of as maybe the physical thing, right? The volume that we inhabit, the doors and walls in that. But the sense of place is like what we make of that space, right? How we use it, how we move around in it, the different ways we're able to or not able to move, maybe based on our own physical abilities, maybe based on social rules and norms and decorum, and then the kinds of activities that are happening in here, right? This is kind of woo-woo stuff, right? Kind of spiritual things. But you think about, the thousands of students that came through this building. And there's a certain kind of energy to that, right? We're in this building that's been here for over 150 years. There's something different about that. It may be hard to pin down, to define in National Register terms, but it's important stuff nonetheless. So we talked about significance, kind of understanding what's the story, what's the why, who used the building, is there something special about the way it was built, or who it was built for, or who used it, or who lived in it. Those are all criteria of significance. And if you're interested afterwards, you can go online or read this National Register bulletin that takes you through all of the different 50 pages of the different ways to apply these 4 criteria of significance to National Register criteria to historic properties. But these 4 criteria are important because when it comes to defining what makes something historic, right, we can appreciate the intangibles and subjective qualities, but there are also some statutory requirements, right? There's some point you have to say this is historic or this is not. And you need to be able to make your argument, right, and make that interpretation. So that's an important part of it. And then how much has it changed? This idea of integrity is really important as well. And integrity is simply a way of saying, how much of that original material, that original feeling, original design, does this thing survive? How much of that survives in it, right? And that gets a little subjective to work through. So what designates a historic property? This is our building that we're in right now, the Douglas Union School, built in the 1860s, and a photograph of it, I think from the early mid-20th century. And if you paid attention, if you've walked by this building or spent some time looking at it, you can see, I think right away, wow, this retains integrity. This building looks basically the same as it did in this photo from the early 20th century, and it probably looks remarkably similar if we brought somebody back in time from 1870 and they came and looked at the Douglas Union School. From the outside, they would find it remarkably similar and familiar to them, right? And the same is true of much of Douglas, right? Much of the scale of Douglas, the scale of buildings, their architectural features, the materials that they have, the craftsmanship that's on display would be pretty recognizable to someone from the second half of the 19th century, right? With some exceptions, they might walk by and not look too carefully at some of our buildings or some of those changes. They might notice a lot of things are gone and there's something new in that place. But overall, we have a 19th century village-like character to this place, right? Which many other communities do not have that were around in the same time. How do we recognize that? How do we designate that? You've walked by as you came in today past the big green sign, the Michigan State Historic Marker. This is a program that really took off in the 1950s and is owned and managed by the state of Michigan. These signs, these markers are actually owned by the state. We have to pay for them as property owners or nonprofits, communities that put them up. But they're owned by the state, and there's a certain kind of responsibility and something special about that. They have a certain rigor to them. To get one of these signs requires extensive research and documentation with that information. So the schoolhouse, old schoolhouse, Douglas Union School, our building, is on the state historic register. We have a marker, and those two things go kind of hand in glove. It is also listed on the National Register of Historic Places, National Register listed property. And that means it can have regional or state or national significance, but it falls under one of those 4 criteria of significance, and it retains integrity. It has enough of its original specialness, uniqueness, originality, authenticity left. And someone has taken the time to do the research and prepare that nomination, which can go on these days for 50 or more pages and many, many revisions. I think it took about 5 years to do the Mount Baldhead Radar Station National Register nomination to completion. Okay? Okay, state listed property, National Register listed property that we're sitting in right now. I share this because there's a lot of confusion around names and terms used to describe historic places, structures, landscapes, and objects that have very specific meaning to professionals in the field and also have very specific meanings at the federal, state, and local level in terms of authority, in terms of regulation, in terms of protection, okay? I don't think you'll be able to read this because it's really washed out. This was a Facebook post from a couple of years ago by the National Register of Historic Places for Preservation Month, and they said the National Preservation Act created the National Register of Historic Places on October 15th, 1966. It's widely believed that later that same day or possibly the next was the first time someone got our name wrong. And then it's a whole list of these different names. I won't read them all. The National Landmark Registry, National Historic Registry, National Historical Society, National Register of Historic Buildings, National Historic Site, Historic Registry, NPS Registered, National Historic Landmark List, Preservation List, U.S. National Registry, Registry of Historic Places, and so on, right? So these terms can sound pretty interchangeable, these different words, but have some very specific meanings as we look at them. As that post just suggested, the National Register is a program that came about through the Historic Preservation Act of 1966. I'll say a little bit more about that at the end of the program tonight and come back around to that. It's a historic designation program that's part of the Department of the Interior and specifically the National Park Service, but is administered by the states. So something called the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office in Michigan, is the agency that basically oversees, is like a liaison to the National Park Service and monitors that list and provides professional services, professional support to communities. But anybody can nominate a property to the National Register, right? It's designed to be a kind of diffuse grassroots type program at its core. Because federalism, right? There was some acknowledgement in 1966 that protecting historic resources was important, and particularly protecting them from things like building giant interstate highways, right? Building hydroelectric dams that might destroy whole communities, or valuable historic buildings and churches and neighborhoods. And they recognized that the best way to do that would be to empower people who actually live in these communities to recognize what's special about their communities, rather than someone flying in from Washington, D.C. and saying, oh yeah, this church is really special and this one isn't, right? So there's some power to the people kind of embedded in the program as a whole. Federal level, National Register. State level, State Register, which is less significant than it once was. And then local. And I think we're all probably familiar in this room with the local historic district, the Saugatuck Historic District, which includes all of the properties that you see within this outline here on the map. So the most historic areas of Saugatuck, the oldest, lots of early surviving buildings there. And the Historical Society History Center played a key role in doing the survey work in that very grassroots model, right? Of doing the work, of identifying what buildings are contributing, what have significance, which have integrity, and those that don't, right? And you're probably also familiar with the Historic District Commission in Saugatuck, which is the body of, again, appointed local people that are there to help regulate and ensure that historic character remains intact. People can't randomly tear things down. They can't randomly change the exterior appearance of their houses. There's a process by which that should be reviewed and enforced, right? Okay, so local district is the primary tool, is the most powerful tool to protect the historic character of your local community. In fact, big shock, right? Big surprise, along with the nomenclature and names, right? Being on the National Register, being on the State Register, having a state historical marker in front of your property confers no protection at all from someone significantly modifying that building or removing that building entirely, okay? I'll just connect the dots here. So to tear a building down or make significant alterations to it in the local historic district in Saugatuck, you would have to go to the Historic District Commission and follow these steps and go through this process. And if you don't, there's various processes and wheels that will be set into motion around that. Outside of a historic district, or outside of the Saugatuck Historic District, the north side of Howland Street, up on the hill, right? You can think of examples of historic properties that are renovated or demolished, right? They may be very historically significant, and those properties can be destroyed without any recourse for the local government, for the community at large. All right. So this brings us to our focus for today, talking about the history of Dutcher Lodge, its preservation, past, present, and future. A photograph here from this year of a great historic building in our community. It's a very historically significant building. If you've walked by it and spent time there, you know it is indeed on the State Register as of 1985, and in 1997, it received its historical marker, which features the history of Douglas, its settlement in the 1860s and incorporation in 1870, and the story of Dutcher Lodge, right? Historical marker that's placed there. The building is not on the National Register. It's not in a historic district. There's no historic district in Douglas, right? There's no historic ordinance, preservation ordinance in Douglas, right? So, thinking about the context of that, right? In part, the timeliness of this program of talking about the preservation of Dutcher Lodge is around the sale of this building, which is on the market as of about 3 weeks ago. And the city, or the realtor, is in the process of reviewing offers on the building through Friday, this Friday, 2 days from now. There's an offer on the building currently, and likely there may be one or two more offers from talking with the realtor as well, okay? So this building is for sale. The city of Douglas is selling the building And I'll share a little bit more of the history of that, what leading up to that in just a minute. And Douglas Council, as I understand it, is planning to review over the next week and likely make a decision about the sale of the building as early as June the 2nd, the next city council meeting. So let me share a little bit about the history of the building, and then we'll talk more about the preservation aspects of it, both past and for the future. So Douglas began as two communities separated by Center Street. Jonathan Wade's Dudleyville on the south side of Center Street, and the town of Douglas on the north side of Center Street, platted by William Dutcher in 1861. Fun fact, Dutcher named this for his town of Douglas on the Isle of Man in the Irish Sea. Many of you might know that history, so a big international historical connection that's embodied in there. He was involved in the lumber trade. He had his son, Thomas Dutcher, had a 3-story commercial and residential building in Douglas, which was built in 1867 and then burned. And it was in this building that was the first Dutcher Lodge. And then in 1875, this building that we're looking at here, half of this building was built. This half of the building here. And in 1905, an expansion of the building was completed, essentially doubling the size of Dutcher Lodge. A grand building that looks, as we see here, from around 1910, looks very much the way it does today. So as we think about that idea of integrity, right? This is a building that has retained a lot of integrity, and it's taken some work, right, to ensure that this building has survived to make it to 2025, to get into its 150th year with us. Surprisingly few photos of the building, given how much photography there is and how long the building's been around. So that's been something surprising. If you know of other historic photographs, love to see more of those from that 1870s to 1900s period. This is a photograph from around 1964 as it was labeled, so I hope that's accurate. No cars in the photo, so we can't really date it. But again, you see the overall form of the building is much the same. And then the building here, after extensive stabilization in the 1990s, photographed for the Raising the Roof exhibit and Jim Schmeeken's book, Raising the Roof, by Vicky Stoll. Beautiful photo of the building, and it brings out some of these. Great Italianate architectural characteristics of the building. It's a very kind of simple array in terms of the design elements of it. An emphasis on the vertical as you stand out in front of it. It feels like a very kind of tall, soaring building with these 2-over-2 windows in its design. Tall, relatively narrow doors, these pilasters, calling our eyes upwards. Fairly plain, kind of a focus on the solidity of the wall as we're in front of the building. There isn't a lot of projecting elements or bays as we look at the design. And then this great bracketed cornice, right? Fairly simple, but some curving forms that insert themselves in there, and 2 large brackets at the end of the building. A little bit about the history of the building itself. We talked about Douglas. The lodge itself is, I think, most distinctive. I think one of the most significant things about the building is this combination of village hall and fraternal social hall in one building. Yes?
It doesn't make any difference, but when they redid the building, the front doors were lost and never recovered, and so they're replaced with what you see. Go
Gotcha.
back to the previous.
Okay. Yeah. This.
Historically, those doors were always painted, and you
Okay.
can see what a mess they are now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's your white doors, the
Right.
originals.
Yeah. That's a great photograph. This is a color slide that was scanned several years ago, and boy, you can really get a sense of the design of those doors.
There's no tree.
There's no tree there. Yeah. That tree grew up in 1964 was a long time ago. I was struck by that too. One detail you can see, all these subtle details here. So you see this tree that's dead or has been cut down, that's here in front of the other door into the lodge. And if you look at this photograph here, you can see that tree about 40 years earlier. Probably the same tree, quite relatively small. And this photo here. So these trees grow pretty quickly. I did not bring in any photographs of or press coverage of the removal of the tree, right, of a couple of years ago. But it is interesting to think about how the landscape, even on a fairly small site, right, there's not a lot of garden space around the building or landscaping around the building. That's how that changes. So what I thought I would share, let me skip to, mindful of our time here tonight too. I'm going to read this quote from James Sheridan, which is featured in the Douglas Historical Preservation Committee poster from around 1991. When the committee was formed. And I'll share a little history of that. We've got some folks here, I think, that have some personal, I know have direct connections and some things they can share about that history as well. But I wanted to read this, because I think this quote just gives us some real insight into the significance of the Dutcher Lodge. James Sheridan wrote the pardon me a second here, Saugatuck Through the Years, which was published in 1982. And I won't read everything that he wrote about Dutcher Lodge. It's, about 2 pages worth of history about the building. But I did want to read this. Newcomers to Douglas are often surprised by the presence of the building, which is labeled Dutcher Lodge, F&AM number 193. And just to skip back here for a second, in the era, in the 1980s, that sign was on the building that you see here. And, we'll see some photos of that again in a minute. It simply seems too large and too grandiose to be merely the home of a fraternal organization. When the structure was erected in the early 1870s, however, it was intended to serve more than that purpose. Douglas needed a governmental center, and it was also in need of a community meeting place where entertainments, dances, and large gatherings could be accommodated. So a number of birds were killed with one stone, figuratively, when the lodge members voted to build such a hall. The hope, of course, was to regain construction and operating costs by rental fees. It was not monumental by later standards, amounting to only $1,400, but the wisdom of shouldering such a financial burden. However, things worked out well because the village council agreed to modest rental, and the government personnel continued to use the building for official purpose. At a later time, it was used as housing for its fire department for almost 100 years in that lower level, garage level of the building there. Let's see here. Douglas partisans took considerable satisfaction from the fact that the hall was more spacious and utilitarian than the one in Saugatuck that had been established at the same time. Right? So this rivalry, Saugatuck-Douglas, is nothing new to that at all, right? And then in 1905, if you walk past the building, you can see the date stone, cornerstone right here on the building. They began to feel that the hall needed to be expanded, voted to enlarge it, spent $2,500 and doubled the size of the building. For many years, the village rental fee consisted of a token expense, 50 cents for rental, plus firewood that you needed to heat the building with. And so that is that early history of the building. So we talked earlier about historical markers, and there are two historical markers at the Dutcher Lodge. One is that state historic marker that we looked at already, and the other is a plaque on the building that acknowledges the contributions made by the Douglas Historical Preservation Committee from 1991 to 2005, right? So a long run, 15, 16 years of work. The purpose of the DHPC was to discourage demolition of the hall, Italianate structure known as the Dutcher Lodge, and raise funds for its restoration. Its goals were to return the building back to a gathering place and cultural center. Thankfully, the building stands with dignity due to the efforts of 40 individuals who formed the DHPC and worked for 14 years together to achieve their goals. They registered the building as a state historic site and funded the official State of Michigan historical marker. At this time, 2021, the building is functioning as Douglas City Hall. So we can read a lot out of that paragraph, and we can start to fill in some of these details. What was the Douglas Historical Preservation Committee, and how was it that this building, which was a combination lodge, Masonic Lodge, and City Hall, went through? What changes did it go through in this period in the 1960s and 1970s? So we've alluded to some of this already. The Historical Preservation Committee was an auxiliary group charged with raising money for the preservation, for the improvements and stabilization of the building, right? And that's sort of...
Was this through the city of Douglas or the village, or was that just an ad hoc committee?
It was a committee that was affiliated with the city, that the city had helped organize, but the group worked independently.
We were a nonprofit organization.
And it become a nonprofit, had a 501c3 status, which we'll get to in just a moment, some of the examples of some of the things that were done. Very active group in this period from 1991 to 2005, and I pulled out of the extensive materials that I'll just give acknowledgement here to Judy Anthrop, who had, of course, is recognized and had played a huge role in this group, but put together much of the material that we have about the workings of the group, the activities of the group, and I'll just say that anything that I share with you here, all the mistakes are my own. They have nothing to do with, none of them accrue to Judy in this. But you can see and perhaps recognize many, many names of people that are still involved in the community or have a huge legacy in our community here that all did important work to help raise money, to help educate and build awareness, and to ensure that the building survives right through to today. I mentioned Chuck Lorenz, who we'll hear more about next week, who owned the Old Wing Mission building that we'll hear more about for the next preservation talk. He's also very active as a founding member of the Historical Society in 1986, and played a big role in the Dutcher Lodge project as well. So a couple of news stories is talking about the historic home tours as one of the activities that the Preservation Committee did to help raise money and to help educate and build awareness that, hey, there's a lot of historically significant and special places in Douglas, right? So this was a story that appeared in the Holland Sentinel. I just love this clipping, the haps. It just seems very, very cool and with it for 1990s Holland. And kind of a cool photo here, standing out in front of Dutcher Lodge. Really good press coverage. It's kind of impressive to think about the different way that the print media operated in the 1990s. The Grand Rapids Press had feature stories about the Dutcher Lodge and Douglas preservation, which is kind of incredible to think about today. Pretty tough to get things into MLife. And so it's also a good kind of reality check when you're doing history to see that sometimes these issues, they definitely don't go away. They kind of circle back around at different points in time. So history lovers hope to save once bustling Dutcher Lodge for use in the future. Right? This is kind of the nature of historic preservation. There's no finality to it, and it can often be heartbreaking work. Can't save everything, right? Entropy wins. But many of the most special things we have are worth protecting, right? Are worth fighting for. Some photographs just to give a sense of how those donations that were brought in $100 or $1,000 for an event at a time, as well as grants and larger donations, the kind of work that did, right? Which led to really fundamental building repairs, stabilization kinds of work, right? So the replacement of windows, the replacement of the roof, activity going on pretty much year-round back in the early 1990s working on this. Photographs here of the replacement of the roof and I think the setting of the trusses of the roof. We'll see photographs of the interior in a moment, but you can actually see daylight right in this photograph here. There's no roof on the building, or parts of the roof are completely gone. Looking at this here, and you can see maybe some of the older material that's being moved around. Another photograph here from probably the early 1990s, and a sign on the front of the building and a phone number. No email, QR codes,
Do you know
any of
who's
that.
in possession of the sign?
I don't. Does anybody know? I don't see. We do not have it, to my knowledge. It's not in the History Center collections. Definitely very cool artifact for sure. And not an easy artifact to hide away somewhere either. I don't know how long that is, but it's got to be 20 feet long, right? 15 feet long.
I would hazard a guess that sign is with the Masonic Lodge in Fenville.
Oh, that's a good point.
It was the first Masonic Lodge in this area.
Yeah.
And they birthed out the one in Fenville.
Yes.
The one in Saugatuck.
Yes.
So they probably have it over there in Fenville.
Mm-hmm.
If they preserved it.
Right. Yeah, that's a great suggestion of a place to look, right? A place where that would naturally go. Part of the history here, by 1990, the building is in disrepair, is in very difficult condition, and the lodge, the Masons, sell the building to the village of Douglas, and kind of relinquish their share in the building on a land contract basis. And then, if I understand correctly, there was some hope that they would be able to return once the building was repaired. Do you know, Jude, can you shed some light on that?
Condemned it, so.
Yeah. So the building was condemned then in 1991, shortly after it was sold, given up by the Masons, and as they moved out.
And you probably already know that it was promised in writing that the Masons could have the upstairs, and the city never finished the upstairs.
That's right.
It's still unfinished.
Right. We'll see photos of that in just a minute. Exactly. Yeah. So to talk a little more about the preservation committee activity, incredibly active group, as you've seen already, and part of a key element to the work was not just to save this building, but really thinking about that in those intrinsic function of the building as both a village hall, a seat of local government, and as a social space, right? Both for the fraternal organization as well as for the community at large. And so I just pulled a few things of the ephemera in advertising and marketing for the many, dozens and dozens of events that were done, which also have kind of long legs, right, in our community. Many of these activities, like Douglas Oktoberfest, right, was a fundraiser to benefit the restoration of Dutcher Lodge as a cultural center, right, exactly as you can read here, and has sort of begat many of the social gatherings, social activities that are still going on today. This was the cover of the Convention Visitors Bureau catalog, promotional book in 1993. and then was also the same design as the blanket that the Historical Society sold at the time too. But I really loved it, this design here that sort of highlights many of these historic sites that are still here, right, that we've managed to retain, with the exception of the big pavilion, which burned in 1960. So that was long gone, but so much nostalgia for it, right, in such an iconic building that it lived on. I did not have time in putting this program together to dive fully into the kind of full history of Dutcher Lodge and its use at different moments in its history, and particularly in the late 19th and early 20th century. But the fully searchable portion of the commercial record did yield some gems. These are both advertisements from 1958, and these were parties at the Masonic Hall, which is Dutcher Lodge, in 1958. Come As You Are dance and card party every Saturday night, which sounds like a good time for 50 cents at Dutcher Lodge. And then the St. Valentine dance, do-si-do and out you go, to the Saturday night Valentine Square dance at the Douglas Village Hall. And there's also this cards and dancing was a good combination, I think, in the 1950s. So fun stuff going on. But these were, public events, community events that were happening, entertainments that were happening in this building. Another collection that survives is this scrapbook with some photographs and some annotations from the fall of 1986. There's a small concert that's going on here on the left. Bill Johnson on sax and Jarvis Clayman on the organ at the Village Hall. This is you can see the stairs going upstairs in the back corner there. This is the ham supper that's taking place in the hall. Is this on the first floor?
Yes.
Okay, this is on the first floor of the building there. Some wild looking kind of early kind of Victorian wallpaper that you can see there. As the story continues on, right, through the 1990s and the 2000s, Douglas argues over Dutcher Lodge, and so this story here is really talking about what the city wants to do. City offices and city space had been in what has been the police station building across the street, and in 1998, in April of 1998, they're talking about whether to sell what is now the police station building as they move into Dutcher Lodge to return to the historic Village Hall. And so there's lots of discussion about should they leave the more modern building, should they get involved with Dutcher Lodge at all, and the costs connected with that, maintenance costs, and all the implications with that. So spoiler, a month or so later, they approved moving into Dutcher Lodge, right? So there's further discussion with that. And in 2002, this story that highlights that renovations are near an end in 2002, and that there's contracts out to complete the work of the building back in 2002. Highlighted another great photo, which actually does include the tree at the corner of the property in 2002 there, has grown up pretty quickly in the 40 years since the earlier photo that we saw. But this article also acknowledges that, over the course of these 14 years, of the committee in operation, they raised over $150,000 through bake sales, sidewalk sales, a car raffle, and home tours to pay for new support beams, foundation, windows, roof, doors, windows, etc. So, kind of an incredible project to kind of work through that. So, that kind of brings us up. We're skipping over a lot of details. We can talk about some of those of you have experience and memories of this. But to bring this story up to where we are today, how did we get to 2025? And Dutcher Lodge, the police station building, on the market for sale. And we can go back to December of 2024. And a couple of years of planning and discussion and negotiation that leads up to this. But Douglas okays the renovation and move funding through bond to move to the community hospital complex. And as a part of that is plans to sell the police station, 47 West Center, and Dutcher Lodge. The timeline for this then in January of 21st of 2025 was the first reading of the ordinance to approve the sale of city property, of surplus real property. That second reading is then passed on February the 3rd, and the listing goes live in April 26th of 2025, and we can see that information. So the property is listed for $599,000, and there's some quite fascinating photographs of the building as part of its marketing. We live in a remarkable age that we can have these panoramic photos, but sort of gives you a sense to make that point about integrity, the integrity of site and location and setting and feeling. You know, we can see us, we could wave to ourselves, right, out the window here, but this view here of these 19th century buildings along Center Street as we look along here. Here's some of those doors, the elevator and stairs. Larger meeting space on the first floor. Basement section. Many of you know or may have worked in this space. The Historical Society / History Center had its archives and tech group that was working in the basement of Dutcher Lodge for many years. And here's the view of that second floor. We can see that the replacement rafters, trusses rather, and a huge open space of roughly 63 feet by 45 feet. Clear span, so about 2,800 square feet on that main level. So thinking about this building, in part, as I said at the beginning, we put this program together to fulfill our mission to help educate our community about the history of this building, of its significance. Part of our mission as well is to advocate, to help argue for, speak for history in the community. And I think I would add to that the importance of stewardship. We have a role, and I'd say that we, not just me and the mouse in my pocket, but all of us in this room, all of us in this community, to speak to the significance of places that we've come to appreciate and learn more about. And so some visions that I've had and have heard in conversation with others is thinking about, first and foremost, wanting this building to persevere, wanting it to survive for another 150 years. Preservation, right, as survival is its own objective, right, is its own reward, being here, right? Stewardship and protection of the village architectural character. We can go back to some of these photos we flipped by a minute ago and imagine, the potential loss of this building or radical changes to this building could have a very dramatic effect on the character of the community as a whole. The original function and intrinsic purpose for the building was as a social space for the fraternal order, for the local city government to do its business and its democratic work, representative work, and for these social events that took place that was a big part of the community then and now. A gathering place and cultural center for all, a public space. And I think this last one here, of really thinking about the future of this building, what opportunities are there for this as a public space, not as commercial retail or as residential, right? But as public space for programs or events, for education, for Art Coast inspiration. So that's some vision casting for you all to think about. And I'd be very interested to hear in some of your reactions and thoughts about this building and about its history, its present, and its future.